Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here. And Pixar's back, having already explored the very child-friendly themes like the human subconsciousness and the metaphysical reality of the soul and the afterlife. Pixar Studios is turning their attention to the next kind of uncharted frontier, maybe the most difficult theme they've had to tackle yet, puberty. That's right, this is a movie about puberty, so buckle up and let's talk about it. So let me just say, kind of right off the start, I've reviewed a lot of movies here at the Collision, all different types of movies, and this is maybe one of the most kind of tricky movies that I've had to review yet, for reasons that we'll get into in just a little bit. So let's just make it clear from the start that kind of the purpose of these reviews is never to be, that I'm some expert to tell you if a movie is good or bad, or even to tell you how to think about a movie. I just like to kind of dig into the themes, what I see, hopefully open a discussion about it. And this is definitely a film that lends itself well to kind of a discussion, and it's kind of a messy, intentionally messy movie that's dealing with some important stuff, but I think there's also some areas, especially as a Christian viewer, to definitely be aware of going into this. It's hard to believe this is the 25th Pixar film. They've come a long way since those lovable toys and Toy Story back in the day, and kind of at this point we know what to expect from a Pixar movie. This is a good movie. Overall I actually really enjoyed this movie. I have maybe some questions and stuff, but this is a movie that kind of has all the elements that you expect at this point from a Pixar movie. The animation, of course, looks gorgeous. It's great. I'm definitely not like an anime fan. This does not do anything for me. And this kind of the aesthetic of this is very much inspired by kind of anime and some of that. But I dug it. I found kind of the way that they did it in this movie was cool. They were able to do some pretty creative stuff. It looks cool. It just adds a lot of like kind of life and energy to the story. And again, the story itself, it has all the elements that you expect from a kids movie, but especially like a Pixar movie. You have funny, quirky characters. A couple of the characters, like the main character's three best friends, that just cracked me up the entire time. They're just kind of hilarious characters. It has the emotional, heartstring tugging beats that you expect from these movies, and it deals with some kind of more weighty thematic material in kind of a more sensitive way than you would expect. So again, this is sort of bringing together all the elements that you'd expect from a Pixar movie. I'd say kind of in like the pantheon of the Pixar films, this one reminds me most of last year's Luca. The stories are similar, kind of a young character, a coming-of-age story where a character has to kind of hide their monstrous inner identity from the public. So there's similarities in that, but it's also just kind of a more, it's a less kind of wild, crazy, over-the-top story, although it is about a girl turning into a panda, but it is a little more kind of like reflective and kind of more grounded, I guess, in our reality, sort of like Luca was. And that is the premise of this movie. You have a 13-year-old kind of Chinese Canadian girl kind of going through some life changes at that time, and kind of based on some curse and some family history, she turns into this giant, fluffy, adorable red panda anytime she experiences kind of any extreme emotions, which as a 13-year-old teenager is a serious problem and happens quite a bit, and she has to kind of wrestle with how to keep herself, kind of control her emotions so that she doesn't in the middle of school or family kind of just turn into this big monstrous panda. And speaking of that, it's probably time to address the big giant red panda in the room. The panda in this movie is very intentionally, overtly intended as like a metaphor for puberty. This isn't like a subtle thing where you got to kind of read between the lines. This is intended to kind of as a commentary on that, and just the way that they set it up. The first kind of her first transformation, kind of the way it happens in the bathroom, and it's definitely kind of hiding from her mom and sort of some of the shame. It's kind of, I think specifically it sort of represents like a woman's period, and kind of more generally I think just puberty and life changes and kind of the emotions that it has. But I do think that it kind of although some of the experiences, some of the stuff that they get into is maybe more kind of culturally specific or just specific to like a female's upbringing and not necessarily as universal as some other themes, I do think kind of overall this story has some very applicable kind of life lessons. And probably the best kind of summation of this movie actually comes from the main character, her father is kind of giving her some advice as she's dealing with this, and he says people have all sides to them. Some are messy. The point isn't to push the bad stuff away; is to make room for it, to live with it. And that's kind of the message of this film is just that, hey, life's messy, and kind of never more so than kind of the coming of age and going through puberty and going through school, and just the way that kind of shakes up your life at school, your friendships, your relationship with your family and your kind of parental figures, and all those things that it is messy, and it's you can't just ignore it, but you do have to kind of I guess embrace it and kind of wrestle with it. And kind of related to that, the way this film ends, kind of with a voiceover, or Mia speaking, and she says, "We've all got messy, loud, weird parts of ourselves hidden away, and a lot of us never let it out, but I did. How about you?" So I think, although this is a film that's about like puberty and kind of a topic that is maybe like kind of uncomfortable or messy or just not talked about as like overtly as this film deals with it, I think on a larger level, this is a film that is applicable to a lot of things that kids are going through. I think even a lot of things like for a parent that has kids, or just sort of thinking through some of those issues. So it's a deep story. That's not to say it's not like a fun story. There is a lot of stuff to this movie that I can appreciate. I do think that it's maybe one, as far as like Pixar movies go, it might be kind of a film that like a kid enjoys while they watch it, but don't necessarily like ask to watch it again and again. It is just the material and kind of a little more like emotionally charged, and just it's not quite as zany to have that kind of rewatchability. But it doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It's just not trying to be that kind of movie. It's trying to kind of deal with some stuff, and there's some great moments in this movie, even just as it kind of gets into like generational stuff and the relationships of the characters that it is. I think it's raw, kind of a more raw story than you get with most kids' movies. I think kind of that is both, the results, like the best parts of this movie, and also maybe some more of the tricky elements that we can get into in just a second. So as far as this kind of content on the surface, profanity, there's not swearing in this movie per se, but it is very much like centered on like teenage kids, and they say a lot of words and stuff that I think a lot of parents probably don't want their kids to be necessarily repeating. Words like crap, dork, stupid, perv, sexy, jerkwad, butthead, all these sort of things that we probably, if we were honest, we probably said those sort of things when we were teenagers. So it is authentic to the characters. Again, if you have a young child that's prone to repeat what they hear in movies, be aware that this movie is filled with sort of words like that. Sexuality on the surface, none. There's no like naked cartoon characters or anything like that. But yeah, this is a movie primarily about kind of dealing with and wrestling with and working through puberty. So like thematically, sexuality is front and center in this movie, but not in like a gratuitous, like showing kind of, that sort of, showing a lot of skin or anything kind of way. And violence, there's no violence in this movie. The panda gets angry and kind of, roughs up a guy. But this is a cartoon. This isn't a movie that is violent by any means. So as far as kind of like the themes beneath the surface, like I said, just talking about the movie, obviously the way, this is a movie that's dealing with like puberty and growing up and things that you don't expect in like most kids' movies, like a woman's period or some of those things. If you're a parent, be prepped that, for questions like, "Mommy, what are pads? There's going to be questions that come out that maybe don't come out of your typical Disney movie." And I think kind of consistent with the theme of kind of the overarching theme in this movie of just messiness is that like the way that this film navigates that and kind of raises these issues is also somewhat messy. It's not always clear cut. It does sort of raise questions that it doesn't necessarily always provide simple answers to. And I think kind of on the one hand, as I was watching this movie, kind of, hey, this is sort of uncomfortable. We're talking about puberty. I think almost that feeling validates the point of the movie, the fact that these sort of universal experiences that every kid is going to go through, that all adults have gone through, that these are sort of normal as parts of our human experience. The fact that that a movie would deal with that, and people in society or personally like would be uncomfortable with it, is almost kind of the point of the movie, to kind of take away some of the stigma of that and kind of this like shame and guilt that comes along with dealing with these issues, and kind of expose it that, hey, this is natural. We all go through this. There's nothing to be ashamed of. We can kind of, generations, can come together and kind of work through this. So on that side, I think there's a lot of value in that. But I did, as watching this movie as a parent, kind of the other side of that is just wondering, are my two 7-year-old boys, like, are they ready for this discussion? This is kind of maybe the dilemma of a kids movie that's dealing with primarily teenage themes. The themes in this movie are really going to relate most to kids going through puberty, kids that, and the 13-year-old girl or boy. Younger kids, they're not there yet. So, and some of the things that I think parents will need to wrestle through with this movie is just, is a movie like this, is it helpful to kind of prepare them for those experiences when they're older and kind of take away some of the shame and stigma? Is it helpful in that way, or is it kind of introducing them to desires and ways of thinking that they're just not there yet? Is it kind of forcing them out of that innocence of childhood? And the film kind of acknowledges that tension. It kind of, on the one hand, the mother character, is very kind of oblivious and waits way too long, delays, just will not face the reality that her daughter is now a teenager and going through some of these changes. And it kind of shows like the downside and like the danger of that. But the film also, there's sort of this like melancholy that goes throughout this change that, like, while the film says like this is a great thing, these changes are natural, there's something beautiful about them, there's also something kind of tragic and sad about leaving childhood, and just that innocence where a different boy and a girl could just be playmates and not view each other just as like a sexual object or some of those things. So I think the film acknowledges that it's not a clean-cut thing of sort of how you wrestle with that, and kind of on a meta way, I think parents are going to have to kind of ask those questions too, as far as is this necessarily a film that is dealing with topics and themes that are appropriate for my kid? And I think either way, I think parents definitely need to be kind of guiding their children through these, even if they probably won't pick up a lot of the stuff that's going on. They won't pick up a lot of the metaphors. It's still something to be aware of. And the other kind of theme, which is, I think will probably prove to be maybe the most controversial, at least for a lot of Christian audiences, a lot of the buzz kind of coming, kind of surrounding this film from the start was that it's very like cultural specific and it's not applicable to a wider audience. And in some ways that's very kind of overblown and not true. Like we've already kind of got into that. Some of those themes about growing up are universal to everyone goes through that. But on the other side, this is shared from a perspective of kind of this like Chinese Canadian perspective. As a Canadian, I appreciated seeing a film set in Canada and caught some allusions and stuff from cities that I've been to, so I could relate to that. But again, I'm not a Chinese and I'm not a woman, so some of the cultural stuff I relate to, and for the most part, I found that was kind of cool. I thought took it as like a learning experience to kind of see a different perspective, a different cultural angle that's just different from my own. Kind of the one exception, I think the one that's going to trip up a lot of Christians and just make Christians at least need to wrestle with it a bit, is the way that this film shows kind of like the traditional kind of Chinese Asian religion, kind of ancestral worship is very front and center in this movie. Not really even this is like a backdrop, but a lot of the plot and story revolves around this sort of ancestral worship. Me and her family, they run a temple. And, they're singing, kind of praying to their ancestors and kind of lighting incense. And at one point they're giving like a tour to some tourists. And the mother kind of says, instead of honoring a god, we honor our ancestors. And even like the ritual that they have to try and do to like get this panda spirit out of the girl is kind of creepy. It's sort of this weird like pagan spiritual, almost like this like exorcism where they're chanting and they're like beating drums and the spirit's coming out, and there's like her grandfather's like a shaman and he's sort of doing his spells, and it's something that I think is going to definitely be a stumbling block for people with how you deal with that. And again, like I said from the start, it's not really up to my place to tell parents how to what they should do with their own kids as far as this goes. I think there's several ways you could go about it. I think it could be for mature kids, it could be a learning experience to talk to them about that and kind of about that culture and what they're doing, and compare that to the Bible and some of that. Or I think there'll be some parents that just that it is a bridge too far to go, and they just don't want their kids to be watching a movie that's just sort of I don't think it's the way the film presents it is very much hey, this is a cultural experience that I'm sharing as a filmmaker, and here's one part of that. It's not necessarily, it doesn't present it as like it's preaching and kids go pray to your ancestors once the end credits roll. So it's not like a preachy movie, but it is there. So I think as Christians, however you choose to deal with that with your own kids, just be aware that it does deal with some of that kind of non-biblical spirituality, and at least be prepared to talk with your kids through that, or else just let them maybe watch a different movie. So in the end, I like this movie. Maybe I liked it more than it seems like I liked. I like it because it's messy. I think that's kind of some of the the glory of this kind of movie, is that it deals with stuff that's uncomfortable, that it offers like a different perspective. Obviously, I'm speaking as like an adult. I think as a kid they might see it a little bit different, but this has all the elements that I like of a Pixar movie. And I think that the general message is a very important one. I think it is an area that should be talked about. It should be an area that's not covered in shame. And I think kind of the underlying kind of message of this whole thing is that some of these sort of the way that God designed us, some of these kind of rites of passage that we all go through, that kind of despite cultural differences and the different kind of ways we have grown up in our backgrounds, that there are some kind of universal parts of of life that does kind of transcend those differences and does kind of unite us together. So I think there's a lot to wrestle with this film. It's a good movie. It's fun. It's enjoyable. But definitely it's one that I think parents need to be alert and kind of thinking through with their kids, sort of how to help their kid process it. But let me know what you guys think. If you saw this movie with your kids, or if you're concerned about it, or just have more questions about it before you let them watch it, I'd be happy to answer more questions. But this is a film I think that would be good to talk about. I think there's some there's some good stuff in there. There's some good lessons, but also it's going to, I anticipate being a very controversial movie for a lot of Christians, just based on the way it deals with spirituality and some of those themes. So I'm curious to hear all perspectives, the ones that kind of agree with me, the ones that have a different perspective. Let me know in the comment section. I'd love to have a conversation with you in that. And I'd love to invite you guys to subscribe to our channel. Like the video. We have a lot of stuff, a lot of other movie reviews and stuff coming up. Just trying to approach culture from like a Christian biblical perspective, and just have important conversations about important questions going on in culture. So I'd love to have you join us by subscribing to this channel. But thanks guys for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.